Hey, hi everyone. Welcome to Growth Marketing Webinar, GMA's content series featuring top-notch growth practitioners to help you and your brand succeed in growth. So for today, episode 3, we're honored to have YuHsuan, a B2B SaaS product expert and serial entrepreneur, to share her tactics and go-to-market strategies for B2B products. So to start off, we want this webinar to be highly interactive. So please ask questions in the Q&A tab and upvote for those you want to hear answers to. You can also utilize the emoji panel to show your expressions if you feel like you have anything to say. So the agenda of today will be a 40-minute sharing followed by a 20-minute Q&A session, where we'll go through all of your questions and answer them one by one. So without further ado, let's welcome YuHsuan for her sharing today. Say hi to YuHsuan in the chat panel.
Okay, should we start? All right, I'm just having a look at the poll responses. You can see that we have around half-half from the B2B and B2C industry, and the majority of the audience are marketers and PMs. Okay, that's good. All right, so thanks everyone for joining. Today, we're basically going to cover the basics of what the differences are between B2B products and B2C products. And we're going to talk a little bit about the go-to-market strategy and also the general growth methods for the products. So, so for growth, I think it actually means two things. It could either be the company growth for the overall company size and the maturity of the product, and it could also be the growth for the user base and revenue. And in today's session, we're basically going to cover both. So, okay, a little bit about me. I started my career as a founder in the B2B software space, and I'm currently now at Zendesk, which is a America-based customer experience tool, SaaS. And my current areas of interest are B2B SaaS products, API platforms, and scalable systems. But before I joined Zendesk as a more specialized PM in the back end, I was actually the marketer and designer of my own company's products. So, agenda. First, obviously, we're going to cover what a B2B SaaS is. And then we're going to basically walk through the different phases of a B2B SaaS products lifecycle. Because the characteristics of products can be very different depending on which stage of the life cycle a company is in. And then we're going to move on to talk about and actually drill into the different go-to-market strategies for your B2B product. And then finally, a quick wrap up on the suggestions I have for people outside of the product function on how to work with your product team for overall growth. Okay, so yeah, and of course it matters a lot because B2B SaaS are very different from consumer softwares. Well, I mean, people can actually tell it by just seeing the difference in the names. But if you actually think of it from another perspective, basically B2B products are designed for business users who are not just common people or end consumers. So as a B2B business, you're actually trying to always sell something that doesn't even make sense to the average person, which means that the techniques like product research or analysis or even strategic planning, talking to your customers are even more important than just working in a B2C commercial business, because you are a lot of the times not your product's own users. Okay, so I chose these two screenshots from the same website. This is Toyota's landing page as the start of our webinar today. Basically, I think it demonstrates well what the feeling of B2C products give you versus B2B. So on the left-hand side, we can see that this is a landing page you see as a consumer. Toyota is trying to sell a car to you. There's a very big and stunning picture that grabs your eyes, and it shows the concept of speed. You can see that the car design is very sleek, and it has a beautiful tagline. But it doesn't go into the details and actually list out the specs for you to see, because they don't want you go there. They want you to have an emotional connection with the branding and their product as a consumer. Well, on the right-hand side, we see the B2B landing page in the same Toyota website. And this webpage is designed for basically business procurement units to decide whether or not they want to invest in recruiting a fleet that's on the Toyota brand. So as we can see, those are very practical and practical marketing points on this landing page, right? As a company, you're worried about whether the maintenance cost is going to cost you a leg in the arm, and you want things to be smooth for your operation. To break things into more detail, let's look at the common characteristics of B2C product. First of all, your users, people who are interacting with your products from day to day, are usually the customers themselves. That means if there's anyone making a call on whether or not to adopt your product, it's usually the users themselves. Well, it's totally not the case on the B2B side in a lot of the cases. So in B2B, oftentimes we see that a procurement of a product is actually decided on the executive level, while people actually using the product from day to day are the ground staff. The second point is for the product managers designing for products, oftentimes we are consumers ourselves. Well, in the B2B world, we're usually not the customers nor the users of our own product. And even if we are actually just one of the many possible personas and use cases in our B2B products domain. So it's important not to assume what your users' needs are based on your personal experience when you're working on B2B products. In terms of metrics, for B2C products, since the users are the decision-making customers themselves, it's very important that we deliver the best-in-class user experience. So that explains why in a lot of B2C products like Facebook or social media apps, the top North Star metrics that they're looking at are user retention-related metrics. And they always try to optimize the UI and UX experience. So in these kind of products, usually the power user concept is very strong because we don't see too much of the difference in the consumer's behavior in the products. Whereas on the B2B side, while user experience are also important, there are usually more factors that are equally important when we're planning for our product strategy or roadmap. So other than the experience of the users interacting with our product the most, we'll also need to take in personas like the managers of the ground users and also the admins and executive sponsors for the procurement. So things like system level agreement, SLA, or the reliability and stability metrics are very important when you're reviewing your business product's performance. So this leads to the different pace in the development life cycle and actually also the sales cycle. So for B2C products, it's very important that we always keep up to what the consumer's expectations are. So usually the iteration cycles are shorter. And for B2B products, usually it's longer because unlike in B2C products, we don't do a lot of testing, A/B testings in B2B products after the production stage. Sure, we run experiments while we're still in the research phase, but since B2B products are the software that we provide for businesses to run their own businesses, changing existing features behavior is always breaking some of our customers' existing workflow. And of course, we won't want to do that too often. So for revenue, B2C products have very interesting revenue model because sometimes, for example, in Facebook's case, social media, the operational cost is actually not covered by the consumer themselves. And instead, as a platform, Facebook provides its service for free for the majority of their user and charge revenue from the few business users on their platform, for example, the ads provider or the business accounts. And it's relatively simple on the B2B side because in, I think, more than 99% of the cases, the B2B revenue, B2B products revenue come from the customers directly. So we're going to deep dive into this in just a bit, but just to give you a high-level idea, usually B2B SaaS product has a revenue model by the usage or plan that the business is on, and as its own, major revenue model. And other than that, we also have add-ons or like platform features like APIs or SDKs as an additional income stream. And other than that, sometimes for customers to adopt the products more easily, we'll also provide professional service or training for the business users. So finally, the channels of distribution. For B2C product, it's very straightforward since the customers are the users themselves. We just go where the users are. And in most cases, we'll try to make the onboarding experience as intuitive as possible so that the users can pick up on the product very quick and just expand their usage within the product. Whereas in the B2B case, it's not that straightforward sometimes. And we can basically break things into two brackets, which is bottom up versus top down. So in some of the B2B cases, we see that the sales models and companies actually go from a grassroots perspective. And in some other cases, usually enterprise softwares, it's top down. Okay, so now we're going to have a look at the different phases of B2B SaaS. I got this diagram on the right from Lauren Bass, but it's basically a pretty generic model that can be applied to any software startups. So as we can see at the beginning, a company will be struggling to find its MVP, which is the minimum viable product that works as a solution to solve for a specific problem. So at this stage, it's very important that the business finds the right problem solution fit. It won't work if you're not solving a problem worth solving, no matter how strong your solutions are. And it won't work if you're providing your solution to the wrong audience. The second stage would be finding the right product market fit after you figure out what your what your solution is solving for. So finding the biggest market that picks up on your product is very crucial. And at this stage, since you already know that your product works for people who who own the problem in the use case that you're building for, it's very important that you find the right language that works in your market. By language, I mean the right marketing language, the way you deliver the message and make people want to use your product in that specific market. So Usually at this stage, if we map the product progress to a startup's funding rounds, it's usually from the pre-seed round to the seed round. Okay, so usually when we see a startup successfully raise round Series A or Series B, it's usually when they have already figured out what their product market fit is, and they're about to expand in terms of sales. So at this stage, it's very important that the product market fit goes beyond a general concept of which market works, and actually drill down into the specific channels that are the most efficient in terms of closing deals and onboarding customers. So at this stage, the VC monies are basically treated as fuels on the journey, because we already built an engine that can run, and we just need to add gasoline for it to run further and farther at this stage. So finally, a company would reach its product maturity state. At this stage, it's the company had probably figured out all the channels that work for their product, and also all the use cases the current product can cover. So for the company to continue growing, it has to diversify its portfolio or expand to other markets that it hasn't touched before. So no matter which state a company's product's at, it's always important for us to bear in mind that no matter which state you're at, your product, marketing, sales, and support strategy have to go hand in hand. So by product, it's basically what you build, right? By marketing, it's about telling your audience the right message. It could be used for raising awareness of your company or your solution in general. It could be educating your customers what are the possible use cases your solution can come up for, or just in general how to use your product, and also the word of mouth effect to attract more users from the industry you want to get into, right? And in terms of sales, at different stage of the company, depending on the characteristics of your product, right, how simple or how complex it is, the sales strategies have to adapt as well. And then finally, for B2B products, since it's usually more complicated than consumer products, and it's not as easy for users to always figure out how to use or bring out the most from your products. So it's very important that you provide very good customer support for a B2B product, say for troubleshooting or even the success roles for the customers to utilize your product the most. I'm going to pause here and see if there are any questions posted. No, okay. But anyways, just let me know if you'd like me to pause and clarify on anything while we go. So moving on, I'd like to introduce a SaaS sales model proposed by Joe York. He's a very good writer in the SaaS space, and I personally like this simple and elegant model a lot. So in York's model, there are basically three SaaS sales models. The first one is customer self-service. Basically, these are most suited for products with minimum complexity. As you can see on the x-axis here, he's listed CAC and TCS. Basically, they each stand for customer acquisition cost and the total cost of service. Basically, it's a sum of the cost for the product to acquire a customer. And then on the y-axis, it's the price that you're selling your product for. So usually, if it's relatively cheap for you to acquire a new user, and you're also selling your product at a lower price range, then it's best suited for you to introduce a self-service model for the customers to basically onboard themselves. On the contrary, if your sales complexity is a lot, and you're also selling your product at a relatively high price, then you're basically in the enterprise mode, right? So a few characteristics in the enterprise space is usually the sales cycle is a lot longer because there are a lot more stakeholders in the enterprise procurement process. So in terms of the sales strategy, it's very important to figure out what's the drive your customer is currently having for them to consider your product. Right? What's the problem they're trying to solve? What's their internal selling process? And also, who are the main stakeholders? And which are the people who are against buying your product? And who are the ones pushing the hardest for you? So it's very important as a sales and marketing team to understand those different personas during the sales process in order to bring out the most and sell your products the best in the enterprise space. And finally, if the complexity is relatively low, but you're selling it at a relatively high price, right? These are basically the transactional deals. So it's not very hard for you to convince the customer to buy your product compared to enterprise solutions, but you still manage to sell your product at a relatively high price. So usually this is the kind of products that are very niched, and it's basically targeting the users very precisely so that when the user sees your product, they will be able to see the value in it with minimum effort from your side. Sure, there might be some sales calls explaining what your products can do and clarification since it's relatively high priced, but overall, the customer should be able to make a purchase decision in just a few simple steps, as long as your product makes sense. So one thing to avoid on this map is to not go into the startup graveyard. I think it's probably quite straightforward, but I'm still going to name it out. That is, it doesn't make sense for you to sell something of a high complexity and high cost for customer acquisition at a very low price, because it just won't scale and you'll be burning your runway too fast before you can successfully grow your product into any other of those three spaces on this map. So on this topic, York has actually proposed a few strategies for you to move out of the startup graveyard. So let's start from going into the self-service space. So basically, if you're positioning yourself in this space, it's very important that you choose a big enough market to increase your total number of conversion, right? From people seeing your product to actually making the buying decision on their own. You may want to increase the acquisition funnel, right? If we apply it to the ARR model. And then since you want to reduce the selling cost as much as possible for your business, it's very important that you actually invest in honing your product to sell for itself. Like, sure, you can provide free webinars for product training and use cases. You can provide a free trial in a freemium model. But at the end of the day, it's really important that throughout your sales material and your product demo, you actually let the users feel like your product is really solving a problem for them to make a purchase decision by themselves. So since we're talking about increasing a funnel here, it's very important that you also try to scale and increase your organic growth for people to discover your product. Again, increasing the head of the funnel. And then finally, when B2B users are searching for solutions in the software space, it's very natural for them to just go online and do a search and see which are the products that are getting the most recommendation, or even just see which are the first few things that will pop up on their Google search page. So it's very important that you do your SEO. And since we're talking about reducing the cost of operations in terms of sales and support, my recommendation would be it's actually worth investing in the online community so that the content that people publish online automatically becomes your SEO material. And the users can also solve most of the support problems on their own in a self-help fashion, since there's a knowledge base. The second way of getting out of the startup graveyard is actually by moving into the transactional space by increasing the profit. So here I've listed a formula, which is the delta, the difference of ASP, or the average selling price, minus the CAC, which is the customer acquisition cost. Sure, see, the CAC isn't everything that your company spent on to build the product and bring it to the customers, but I think it represents the gist of it, because in the software company, basically we can treat the development R&D cost as a fixed cost, unless you're laying off a lot of people, right? Because those are just the fixed salary of your staff. So the really important thing is to increase the delta here. You need to either sell your products at a higher price or decrease the cost per customer acquisition by improving your operational efficiency. By operational efficiency, I mean better conversion from the leads generation to actually deal closed, or to basically remove the redundancies in internal process. Since you're not running an enterprise sales model, you want the whole sales machine to be as well oiled as possible. And then finally, to move into the enterprise space. So I think the main difference between a common solution that applies to every and any business to enterprise products is basically the availability for customization. So for enterprise users, they don't just go around and buy a tool in most of the cases. For them to be willing to actually invest in something, and for the internal champion to advocate for your product, they need to have a very real problem they're willing to spend money on. So, which is why it's very important that as a very powerful SaaS product, sure, as much as you're very powerful, you need to show the capability that this is the product that solves for their specific problem. So customization is very important in the enterprise space. So of course, it's less cost efficient for you to just build a product from the ground up for every enterprise customers that you have, which is why modularizing your existing components and making sure that they're as extendable as possible for them to be reused for the next enterprise customer is very crucial. You don't want to rebuild the wheel every time. So it makes sense for you in the enterprise space to build things that are extendable and customizable. Basically, what we call platformization. And one thing I'd like to highlight here is for businesses going into the enterprise sales space, it's important not to chase the elephant customers at the start. Basically, the elephants are the customers that are huge. They're probably one of the biggest companies in the customer space you'd like to go in. But in the enterprise space, in most cases, the larger the customer, the longer the sales cycle. And as a very small company, it's a basically draining fault for you to go into this funnel, because enterprise customers require very tight engagement from your sales and even marketing if you're an early stage company. And focusing on just one customer is going to drain a lot of your resources. And in a lot of the cases, I see startups die because they're overly invested in just few enterprise prospects. So York has also proposed the direction which startups typically grow towards to. And I personally agree with this a lot. So according to him, startups usually grow towards the on market. I think it makes sense from a company resource planning perspective and also the intrinsic product development cycle. So usually when you first start, you focus on solving for the shared problems by a group of customers. And usually once you have this as an MVP, you can start selling to self-service customers already in the SMB space. So at this point, it's a low cost and large scale. You're selling to a big pool of customers. But while you grow more and more mature, naturally, a lot of companies will grow towards the upmarket direction into the enterprise space. They may not actually end up in the enterprise space, but it's for sure that their products will become more sophisticated and can cater to more specialized use cases. One example for this is actually Airbnb. So for Airbnb, when they first came out, they're basically just solving the problem for people not being able to find a place to crash for conferences they travel to. But as you can see today, Airbnb product and operation is more sophisticated compared to when they first started. And they're actually now solving the problem for property companies as well as business travelers already. So, yeah. Okay. And I have a screenshot from a very good Twitter writer that I follow. Sometimes when you come out as a new company and directly focus on solving for enterprise problems as an out-of-the-box solution, it'll take very long for you to actually build your products into that state. So instead of shutting yourselves in the room and building for the enterprise solution since day one, sometimes it actually makes sense to bootstrap by doing some professional services on the side first, in order to still keep the revenue stream positive while you keep on improve your products and build towards the more sophisticated use cases. So the example here is actually Workday, which is a today enterprise HR solution, SaaS, and also Viva, which is a biotech SaaS. So as we can see, when the two companies were at a lower amount of revenue, almost half of their revenue actually come from services, professional services, and the other half come from their product. But when they scale up to $800 million in terms of revenue, we see the proportion in the services part dropped drastically. So this shows that as a SaaS company, it's okay to do servicing at the start. And actually, I think from a product perspective or sales perspective, it's an important experiment to have at the beginning of the company start as well. So as a product person, when the more servicing you do, the more you're able to actually get into a customer's backend and see how they're using your products for. So this is a good way to discover the core features to build or directions to expand into. And for the sales and marketing team, it's also a very good validation of what your biggest selling points should be. So to wrap up for the go-to-market strategy, I think the most important thing is choosing your own battlefield, right? At the formation of the company, it's very important to ask yourself this question, which is, who are your customers? So if you want to go big, there are certain ways for you to go big for big customers, right? So for this, you may want to focus on a small number of very high-priced deals and actually making sure that they're happy with your product and the after-sales applications so that you can actually expand. For companies focusing on more SMB solutions, you want to make sure that you maintain the needed support and sales at a low touch level, so you don't end up over investing in each of the deals, right? So it's important that you actually implement an automated or low touch sale here. And if you happen to fall somewhere in between, it's going to be a little bit uneasy because you're not here nor there. And it's definitely a no-go or like startup graveyard, as mentioned earlier, to go into the big customer space with low touch. It just won't work for enterprise sales. Or go to a high touch approach for very small businesses because it doesn't make sense financially. So for this slide, I actually have some numbers to share as an example. So it's also Workday, the enterprise HR solution that we looked at earlier. So in the year 2008, when they're at 6 million revenue, they had a total of 51 customers. In the year of 2019, they've scaled their customer numbers by 50 times, which is 2,600 customers. But their revenue has actually come to $3.6 billion. That's 600 times compared to 2008, while the customer base had just expanded by 50 times. So from this, we can see that in Workday's example, they've actually achieved scaling the per customer revenue by 30 times on average. And I think it's a very good example to tie back to this startup scaling direction that we looked at earlier. So to wrap today's session up, I'd actually like to show the typical product development lifecycle to the non-product roles that are attending the seminar today. So it's a very typical process for any product manager, but I find this graphics pleasant looking, so I just place it here. So basically for a product manager to come up with features to build, there's ideation spark, right? It's either a trend that we see in the market, it's either some new features our competitors are launching, or it could come from a lost sales deal or customer feedback. So at this stage, we're basically doing discovery and exploration. And then through the observations, we'll come up with some hypothesis, right? And say, oh, a lot of customers are churning because our checkout page isn't good enough. Then this is actually a hypothesis. And once I get this idea, I'll come up with experiments to validate it. Right. So at this stage, I might run some experiments on our product, or I can run some existing data analysis, or in the majority of business B2B use cases, since we don't run experiments on our products so much, I actually talk to the customers to find out why or why not they're not doing certain things. Right. And then if the validation is confirmed, I'll actually try to build a business case around the features I'd like to invest in, or on the flip side, right? Basically, validating whether certain features are worth building for, and if they actually bring in business value. So after this, I'll go into the product development cycle, working with the designers, working with the developers, coming up with the actual implementation of the feature. But after the feature is done, it's actually not the end of a product manager's job. Right? After the feature is implemented, we need to make sure that it's well tested, it's well validated and documented, so that I can bring it to the final GTM stage, which is the pre-launch preparation. So for B2B products, typically I'll work with a product marketing manager who are in larger organizations, a different role from the commercial marketers. And at this stage, I'll work with the PMM to make sure that we come up with materials both for internal audiences like the sales team, the support team, or the enablement team, as well as external audiences like basically the business owners in each of the segmentations we're going after, so that by the time we release our product, everyone can understand why it was built, what it's solving for, and how to help a customer activate or debug it when it's out. So throughout the whole process, you'll notice that there's a lot of observation or experimentation and analysis that we do. And it's very, very important that the product managers actually work closely with the sales and the marketing team to make sure that they're getting the right data to prove their hypothesis. So yeah, my 2 cents for the founders or the marketers or the salespeople here are, if you see something your customers are telling you, it's usually very important that you don't keep it as siloed knowledge and actually bring it to the product team for them to consider. Because in the B2B world, the sales team usually owns the most valuable knowledge that PM just cannot gather anywhere else. So that wraps up everything I have for today. And I think we can enter the Q&A stage.
Okay, let's thank YuHsuan for her sharing. Thank you, YuHsuan. I think your sharing is very comprehensive, and I really like the elegant model, like how to avoid the startup grind. Yeah. So for participants, please ask questions for YuHsuan in the Q&A tab. Yeah, so we've got one here. For transactional product between inbound marketing or paid acquisition, which will you prioritize?
Okay, it's a very good question, team. I actually don't think you need to choose just one, right? It could be a hybrid model. And I actually think it depends on who your customers are. So, yeah. So basically, both inbound marketing and paid ad acquisition are like common marketing techniques. And I think it actually goes by a case by case basis. So you need to see which one actually works better for your own business or your product. And then you can double down on what works best. Yeah. So yeah, I think it actually depends.
Okay, so as you mentioned earlier, there are 4 different phases for the B2B products. And since most of our participants are product marketers in the B2B industry, what in the product market fit stage, how can marketers send the right message to the right audience?
Okay, so when you have a product market fit, that means you have found the best market to sell your product to. So at this stage, I'd say you already have the right audience at hand, right? Because the audience are those that are in the market. But the next step after this is actually to find out which are the best channels for you to reach those targeted audience. So I think at this stage, it's important that you do small amount of experiment on each of the different channels that you have. For example, for a B2B product, the common marketing channels will be online channels like inbound marketing, outbound marketing, webinars, joint exposure in online conferences or media, right? And for offline, it could be just roadside advertisements or like conferences. So I think at this stage, depending on what the nature of your product is and who your business users are, it's important that you try a little bit in each channel to try to see what's the which one works best. And the definition of best actually varies across different companies as well. So depending on your go-to-market strategy, you could be prioritizing for the channels that bring in the most new signups and retention, or you can be prioritizing for the ones that convert to the most dollar sign in terms of like revenue.
Okay, we have another one here. Peter is curious about the growth engine of Zendesk. Like how do you go from the very startup stage to like what's your growth funnel?
So it's a good question. I actually can't share the non-public data from Zendesk, but since we're a listed company, I think you should be able to see something from our financial report. But to give you a general case of what applies to the majority of SaaS companies out there, somebody actually, many research firms have actually just run the numbers on various SaaS companies. And as it turns out, interestingly, the breakdown of revenue shared in each of the companies are around 40% in the very big customers, another 40% in SMBs, and 20% in a long tail of very small companies. So if we actually look at this model, then we'll see that for the big customers, of course, it's worth investing specialized ground troops, basically the sales teams for, right? And for the SMB or for very small customers, we may want to implement some automated sales machine, like a clear landing page with the pricing plans on it, with self-help checkout or trial, in this space.
Okay. We got another one from Sylvia. She's asking, what's the most important thing to a B2B SaaS startup when expanding their business overseas?
It's a very good question. I think there are more localized B2B software, and there are less localized B2B software. So from my own example, my last B2B startup was actually a developer tool. It was an analytics tool for chatbots. So basically, as we can see, the behavior across different developers in different countries are actually surprisingly like uniform, right? No matter which country or which language they speak, their behaviors are pretty much the same, because the tech language is a common language. So it was relatively easy for us to expand overseas. And our strategy back then were still mixed with both online and localized ground marketing. So for us back then, we did quite a lot of community meetups, both online and offline. And the reason we're doing this is because for a lot of B2B customers, actually, there is a so-called Me Too effect, right? So in general case, it attracts a local customer more if you have somebody in their own space using your product, say in the same geographical location or in the same industry, compared to having some big name users very far away, right? So that works. But if your B2B product is actually something very specialized from region to region, then it actually makes sense for you to deploy your marketing and sales troop on the ground in the local market, and sometimes even product team. A good example would be payment systems like Stripe or PayPal, right? Because as we know, the compliance and the legal requirements in each country are very different, and the payment model might differ. Like the user behaviors are different from country to country as well. So in most payment companies, they actually have dedicated product team to actually come up with a localized workflow for each and every market that they go into.
Yeah, I totally agree with this. Like having meetups and the middle effects of the B2B users. If you're interested in the product localization, like how to localize your payments, your products, you can check out our last webinar where the ex-product localization manager of Airbnb talks about the specs in detail. Yeah. Another question would be, what growth levers growth hacking tips you see that can swing big doors more than others?
Let me see. Okay. Define big doors. Victor, are you still online?
Hi, Victor. Victor, are you there? If you're there, please let us know in the chat panel. Okay, so maybe we're going.
Maybe we can circle back on this once Peter's back with us.
Yeah. Another one is from Jason. How will you differentiate and promote products of all of your competitors over very similar products and services?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So, of course, let me just take B2B SaaS in the enterprise space as an example. So, of course, when the executives spend on a solution or a product, they're not the ones using it every day, right? So, the easy way for them to make sure they're not throwing their money into the ocean is by comparing what functionalities or certificates, as in compliance or security certificates, does a solution provide. So that's the reason why on many of the enterprise SaaS products, you actually see them coming up with feature comparisons with their own competitors. So that's one way to get through the door, right? The second point to this question is that when all the hard requirements are very similar, it's even more important that you actually come up with a very compelling storytelling, right? So you can, it's all about branding, and it's actually also why we see a lot more branding instead of very detailed comparison on the nits and bits in the high-end consumer products also, right? So you don't see companies like SAP or Oracle go around and tell you how powerful their systems are. And instead, most of their advertisements show up in the airport with just a brand and a very inspiring background image on the board. Okay. So I think when all the hard requirements are pretty much all very similar, it's even more important for you to attract somebody from the emotional side of things. And that's actually also why a lot of the bigger enterprise SaaS are doing a lot of that. It's a feelings thing.
Okay, Victor's back. On his previous questions, he wants to know like what we can do to have like a huge uplift in the average cart value.
I see. Got it. Okay, let me go back to the original question. Okay, so the goal is to increase the average cart value. So I'm assuming this is catering for the automated sales process for SMB. Right. So there are a few known techniques, and it's actually a bit similar to the consumer space. So let's say you're working on a pricing page on your landing page. Usually, we will want to leverage the anchor effect. So you don't want to just list one plan on your page. Usually we'll provide 3 to 5 options and place the one we want you to buy the most at the center. So it's not the most expensive and it's not the cheapest with the least function. And it will appear like an obvious choice, right, for the viewers. So that's one technique that we use. And another thing that we could use is actually to try and improve the onboarding experience in the product a lot. So let's say you start a free trial on the web page, but you don't feel the value delivered by some of the more advanced features that come with more expensive plans, then of course by the end of the trial, you might just end up with a relatively cheap or even free plan, right? But if during the onboarding process we make you feel like it's going to be quite a pain to live without certain functions, then you might actually bump your purchase plan up by the end of the trial.
Okay. Last question. Also from Victor. Will you secure a pre-committed amount of funds from big enterprise prospects before developing customized feature for them to hedge your efforts?
Yeah. So I think usually it actually differs from vertical to vertical, but I think it's a common practice in the solution space that you always collect your payments in phases. Yeah. So I think a common model would be either payment in 2 batches or in 3 batches, right? There will be a kickoff fee or design fee, consulting fee at the upfront, and then you might have the 50% checkpoint, which your customer pays you another allocation of the fee, and then at the end of the delivery of the product, you'll collect the lump sum.
Okay. We have another interesting one 是 Antron 说，我想要问佑生，当疫情如此严重时，在家工作需求大幅增加，你有实际感到市场上的反应大幅增长吗？那对于现在这个反应有什么样的新策略？
Okay, so the question was about during a pandemic like this, do I see the demand increase in the market? And okay, do I have a new strategy to accommodate the new market reaction? So okay, I need to be very careful with this question. So I think we have just ended Q1, and the pandemic actually started in the most part in the world in mid Q1. So I haven't seen the financial data yet, nor can I share. But from an operational perspective, yes, our customers are getting a lot busier, which is understandable because for customers that are in the B2B space, basically their own operations as well as their customers' operations are getting disrupted a lot, right? And for customers in the B2C space, basically we see that almost all the consumers' day-to-day lives are flipped upside down. So that resulted in a very different user behavior pattern that we're seeing, and that reflects in our users' usage as well. So is there a new strategy for this market reaction? I guess, and this is actually an important point. So stability and scalability is probably the most important thing if you're in the B2B space. So it's fine if you don't have the fanciest UI or the animation for UX, but it's very important that when a business's operations is depending on the quality of your product, you make sure your product takes the load and remain reliable in situations like this. So this is, of course, not something that you can build in a day. But while we're building a B2B product, it's important to make sure that we actually prepare for the worst in case something like a pandemic happens.
Yeah, that's very true. So I guess that's pretty much it for today. Thank you, YuHsuan, for your sharing. Hey, everyone, let's thank YuHsuan in the chat panel and give her applauses, like claps in the emoji. So
okay, thank you guys for joining, and thank you, Amber, for hosting. It's my privilege to be sharing with everyone here.
Yeah, so if you enjoyed this kind of online sharing Q&A learning format, please check out our new initiative we're launching, which is the online bootcamp. And right after the webinar, you'll be redirected to a 1-minute survey. Please tell us, how do you think of the sharing today, where we can improve, and what topics you like to hear from the future, and who would you like to hear it from? And thank you again, YuHsuan, and I'll see you again next time. Thank you for tuning in, everyone. Bye.